So this is Kathy's first time speaking, so we're very, very, very lucky to have her here with us. It could be a nerve-wracking experience to share something especially so difficult for the first time. So please do be patient and empathetic as we go through today. So Kathy was born in Budapest in 1941 by the name Kathy Wilder. Her father and uncle were taken as political prisoners, as they were political resistance to the Hungarian dictator allied with Hitler. In 1944, the Nazis started deporting all of the Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz, where 75% of all Hungarian Jews were eventually murdered. Kathy's mother, Rosie, gave her away to a non-Jewish distant aunt in hope that it would save her life. Rosie was taken to Ravensbrück.
That's right.
A work camp. It wasn't a death camp, it was a work camp, where she had to work very hard labor. After the war, Rosie returned to her apartment only to find it was being used by other people, and it took time to get back on her feet. She remarried, and eventually she was able to claim Kathy back. Living in Hungary after World War II was not easy, as it was a communist country, so Kathy's parents had to sneak out of the country on a very dangerous journey that took them through the Soviet Union and eventually to Vienna, where they lived as refugees. A few years later, they were offered to come to Montreal, Canada. With no money and no English, Kathy's parents worked very hard for 15 years until way into their 60s, when things finally started looking better for their family. Kathy later married and had children, and life's journey brought her granddaughter Alexa, who's sitting next to her, to our program. We're lucky to have Kathy here with us today, as I said. So without further ado, please welcome Kathy.
Hi everyone, my name is Kathy Kolber, and I'm the grandmother, the proud grandmother of Alexa here, whom you all know, and as well as her younger sister Talia, who's not here. I feel very privileged and lucky to be living in this wonderful country. Canada has been very, very good to me and to my family, but it wasn't always like that for me. As Adi was saying, I was born in Budapest, Hungary, which is a country in Eastern Europe. I was born in 1941. World War II was already on, and Hungary had a very, very bad dictatorial government at that time. The Jewish people who lived there were already discriminated against. Jewish children were not allowed to attend school, and the adults had to wear yellow Jewish stars on their lapels so that they could be seen as Jews wherever they went, and their businesses and properties were all taken away from them. My first 3 years were spent with my natural parents without too much incident. But in 1944, the Germans entered Hungary. When the Germans entered Hungary, they took everything over, and they began to discriminate against the Jews. The Jews were put in ghettos where they were shipped to death camps known as concentration camps. They were located in Poland, mostly. My father, Leo Wilder, was taken away in Auschwitz, which was known as the worst concentration camp in the world. Most of the people in Auschwitz were Hungarian Jews, and many of them perished. His brother, Erno, was also taken away as well, also to Auschwitz. His brother had a very close friend who was not Jewish. Her name was Gisela. And my mother, Rosa, feared that she would be taken prisoner as well, leaving no one to look after me. Anybody any questions so far? Okay. Gisela was a very nice woman who took me in when my mother was taken away. As Adi said, she was taken away to Ravensbrück, which was a work camp, not a death camp. I was moved to Gisela's home in 1944 when I was 3 years old. I was very fortunate, since she was a very wonderful woman who took very good care of me. So for the next 2 years, I lived there as her daughter and as a Christian. And I went to church every Sunday. In the meantime, the Second World War was going on in the world. By 1945, the Americans had entered the war and were winning over the Germans, luckily. In May of 1945, the Germans were defeated and the Jewish prisoners who were still alive were freed. My father was killed as well as his brother in Auschwitz. But my mother did come back to Budapest, and I saw her again in 1945. I was very happy where I was with Gisela, so she did not take me back right away. In time, I went back to live with her, but I missed Gisela very much since she was really like a mother to me. And I was told again that I was Jewish, which didn't mean very much at the time, but came to mean a lot to me later. There were no more anti-Jewish laws in Hungary, but the Russian government took over the Hungarian government, and a whole new system was imposed, which was known as communism. People were not allowed to leave the country. They had to stay in Hungary. So my mother met a very wonderful man and married him. He had no other children, so he adopted me. I was again very lucky because he was a very wonderful father to me. But he decided that they were going to leave Hungary because things were so bad there. So we escaped in Hungary. We escaped from Hungary in 1950 and settled in Vienna, Austria, waiting for permission to emigrate to Canada. We lived there as refugees. It took 2 years, during which time I went to school and learned to speak German. We finally did get permission to leave Austria in 1952 and came to settle in Montreal. I was once again in a country where I had to learn yet another language. However, having no choice, I learned to speak English and continued my education. The first few years were very hard because we were very poor. My parents worked long hours and didn't make very much money. But by the time I got to high school, things got easier. They had their own business. And I was able to go to university. I graduated as a physiotherapist in 1963 and eventually got married and had my 2 wonderful children. So I hope that my story will give you some hope, because although it was very bad in the first few years, it got really better and continued to be good. And the Jewish laws have been abolished, and we are lucky enough to have Israel, which we did not have at that time. And so let's hope that all is well for us from now on.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thank you again. Can we give it maybe a round of applause? Thank you for sharing that story. So is there any questions or clarifications that you wanted to ask? Or?
Could you just tell us how old you were when you went to Austria and then when you came to Montreal?
In 1950, we went to Austria in 1950. I was 9 years old, and we stayed there for 2 years. So in 1952, I was 11 when I came to Canada.
Have you been back to Budapest since?
Yes, I have. I didn't go back to any places that would stir up any bad memories. I just stayed clear of them and went to the tourist sections.
Because the government now is not very friendly to the Jewish people.
No, that's right.
So do you see things repeating themselves?
What?
Do you see things repeating themselves in Hungary?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah?
It's always a very anti-Semitic society. Always was, always will be. But there are no Jewish laws as such. It's just...
So hi Jacob, come and join us. Your father and your uncle perished in Auschwitz?
Yes.
And your mother survived and
My mother survived and she came back, yeah.
Did you know?
And my stepfather was also in a camp. He was in Mauthausen,
Okay, wow.
which was also a bad camp, but a lot of people did come back from there.
And he had a family before the war as well, or?
No, he didn't.
Okay. Do you have any other family other than your mother that survived?
Oh yes, I have. My mother had 5 brothers and sisters, and they all survived.
Thank God.
They were in camp, but they came back.
Thank God.
You know, the Nazis came into Budapest kind of late, because it was in September of 1944. So the war was over in 45, and fortunately, a lot of the people from Budapest did survive and come back.
Thank you for sharing your story. It's moving and powerful and something that I don't think any of us could even possibly get our heads around.
Hopefully not.
No. So given that, is there a, you wake up every morning, you come here, you sit here with a smile on your face. You obviously, like, you've got, great grandchildren and whatnot. Like, is there a philosophy on life or something that you live by that you want your grandkids and everyone here to understand that we possibly, given what you've seen, that we possibly couldn't grasp?
Well, I personally try to get away from it as best I can. I just like to leave the past be the past and the present be the present. And I do feel fortunate all the time because I know what it can be like. And I don't have a philosophy per se, but, I just like to feel that I'm comfortable and that I don't have to worry and that I don't have to worry about my grandchildren having the same kind of problems to go through.
Did your mother speak to you freely about her experiences? Or did she
My mother never spoke about her experience. She never mentioned it. And if it did come up, she would leave the room or, she would just change the subject. And really, my stepfather too, they never, ever, ever talked about their experience. It was a topic which was not to be discussed. And I feel much the same way myself. As a matter of fact, my son wants me to go to the March of the Living, and I just refuse. I don't want to have to cope with those things. I don't want to have to cope with those memories.
It's understandable. It's understandable. Do you feel that Judaism has become over the years a big part of your identity?
Oh
Or do you
yes.
feel that
Oh yes, definitely. Definitely.
Was it hard to go from Christianity to Judaism? Did you know that you were Jewish? when you were
Well,
raised?
we got to Vienna, and my father said to me, my stepfather, I call him my father because he was so wonderful, but he said to me, "You're Jewish," and I said, "Okay, what's that?" And there wasn't much religious education in Vienna, so that there was nothing at that time. When we came to Canada, then I was put into a Jewish after school, Hebrew and Jewish learning after school. So then I eventually got an identity as a Jew.
Did you keep a relationship with the woman who took care of you between the ages of 3 and 5?
I went back to live with my mother when I was about 5 or 6, and she very much resented the fact that my mother took me back. So she would literally refuse to see me. And I wrote her letters, and she never answered. And that was probably the toughest part, was leaving her, because in a way, she was more of a mother to me than my mother. And I tried and tried and tried to make contact with her, but she just disappeared. I think she really never wanted my mother to come back, or she thought my mother wouldn't come back. And she raised me as her own child.
So traumatic.
And those were formative years, between 3 and 5. I was tough.
I also want to thank you for sharing your story, and I wanted to ask you, given that it was your mother's philosophy that she never wanted to talk about it, would always leave the room, and you said you were much the same way, you've never wanted to talk about it, don't want to go on March of the Living. I was wondering what inspired you to come here today to speak for the first time, and how has the experience been?
She inspired me.
Did she ask you?
Sort of. But I'm so proud of her, and I love her so much. And I understand that the children are having some sort of education about the Holocaust. So, I guess there's not too many of us left.
Well, thank you so much, because there's obviously a huge difference for them between reading about it or seeing a film. Even if it's, recorded testimony, there's a difference between seeing a film and hearing from somebody in person. So thank you for giving them this experience.
Okay.
I'm just so proud of you. You did
And
it.
I'm proud of you.
You did it. The first time that she's speaking.
Mhm. Is there any other questions maybe our B'nai Mitzvahs want to ask?
Do you have any views on the world today? I mean, now that it was brought up that obviously it's scary what happens, even currently happening in Hungary. But do you have any views of what's happening either in Toronto, or even what's happening in the U.S. or around Europe? Do you have a sense?
Well, there have been a lot of anti-Semitic events throughout the world today. But, let's just hope that it doesn't get any worse. I don't know how to answer your question, but we're just never really safe. So we're lucky that we have Israel.
And any message for the kids? You want to give any message?
No, not really. Okay.
John mentioned that your family was offered to go to Palestine at some point before the war.
Yeah, when we were in Vienna. But they had their eyes on Canada. So we just waited until Canada allowed us to come in.
What drew them to Canada?
What year?
No, what drew them to Canada? Why did they want to come here?
They heard good things about it. They actually knew a couple of people who were already here.
Okay, so when they came, they had a community already. place?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
They had a few friends.
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, Hungarian refugees.
Did you find Canada welcoming at that time, or could you imagine what?
I wouldn't say it was welcome. It was very cold. I remember in January of 1952, we came to Montreal, which was really very cold at that time.
And what were the people? Your first few years here, you didn't speak the language. You're Jewish in a world where a lot of people grew up hearing about anti-Semitism, and were you welcomed by your classmates and from your kids? Were you somewhat ostracized?
No.
No, it was difficult.
Yeah, it was very difficult, and we were very, very poor. It took a long time for my parents. My parents eventually bought a business. Well, they started a business, and they did pretty well. But it took 7 or 8 years for that to happen. We did not experience any anti-Semitism per se in Canada. All my parents' acquaintances who were already here were doing very well, and they were pretty happy. Although, at McGill, when I went to McGill, there was still a Jewish quota. I don't know if it was at U of T, but at McGill there was. So only certain number of people were allowed. Like in the physiotherapy, in the school of physiotherapy, only a certain number of Jews were allowed per year. So there was, some kind of anti-Semitism.
Did you have to learn French as well?
Sorry?
Moving to Montreal, did you have to learn French as well as English?
I learned some French, yeah. But the English and the French were very separated. And it wasn't a requirement to speak French.
And even for your parents' business? I grew up in Montreal, so I'm just wondering.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. For your parents and their business, did they need to know French, or were they okay?
No, they had a clothing business, which was a very Jewish thing to do.
Yeah.
And but the government didn't help you to settle?
No.
Nothing?
No.
They didn't do anything?
No, nothing.
Do you have a sense of there's a good number of people people who we think have Hungarian ancestry, Hungarian Jewish ancestry, that are around your age, or a little bit older, but to this day still deny it, or they hide from it? Do you have a sense of, like, do you have an opinion on, like, that population?
I know people who, yeah, I know people who have renounced their religion and pretend and just deny being Jewish altogether.
But who were Jewish?
Who were Jewish, yeah, at that time. Yeah, I do. I from my own age, people of my own age, who I have some acquaintances who even refuse to have anything to do with me because I'm Jewish. They just want to keep away. They want to deny it altogether. It's a very unfortunate way to be, for sure.
And you think they get that from their parents? Because or they got that from their parents, and it was just
Probably, yeah.
a coping mechanism to
Yeah,
deal with
probably.
it, just if I can
Probably.
distance myself.
Yeah. I think that one way of trying to escape was to deny, you know, all ties to Judaism. You okay?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Okay, so first of all, and again, thank you so much for coming.
My
we have
pleasure.
something for you from the synagogue. It's
Oh.
in an awkward location, so I'm just going to put that one. Should have had it behind me.
Is this a one-off, or do you think you'll continue to speak to audiences who want to hear your story? Or is this one and done?
One and done.
One and done?
I hope it's
Oh,
not.
thank you.
But if it is, I really appreciate
Oh,
it.
thank you so much.
Thank
That's
you.
lovely.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for coming again and for sharing your story. And I really hope to see you again.
I hope so.
Whether in this capacity or any other way.
Thank you.
Of course. Of course. Anyone else on your side? Yes. Small font, small card. So last week we heard from another Holocaust survivor, and this week we heard from another Holocaust survivor, and I really hope and I really implore our students and as well as the parents to keep reading about the Holocaust, to keep thinking about the Holocaust and the implications that it had on our community, and to keep an eye out for anti-Semitism, to keep an eye out for things that happen around you that you're not okay with, because it's our job now to make sure that this never ever happens, not to us, not to any people around the world. Okay?
It's okay.
All right. So the name of are staying here. If parents want to stick around, you can. I'm going to start working on the report for us soon. If not, you're welcome. You're welcome to go, and our program will end today at 12 as always. And thank you again.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Yeah? Yeah. Okay.